shadow.
Before the lights dim, a brief favor. If you enjoy archives and abysses, leave a light for the algorithmic night watch. Now, to the promise. Tonight, we open a file few handle without consequence. The unwritten, the abandoned, the drafts and dream shards Lovecraft left behind. Not the familiar canon, but the gaps between sentences. The forgotten stories he never finished. The veil and the void, bound together in an album of paper ghosts. You will hear them the way he did, as notes in the margins, as midnight corridors of a city that never sleeps, as thin flutes from an upper window where no tenant moves. The core object on our stage is not a monster, but the unfinished page, a mask without a face that still compels breath to fog it. Approach slowly. Knowledge has a cost, and incompletion charges interest. In Providence, a desk. On it, a commonplace book, brown and flaking like dried leaves found beside black water. The smell of dust and iron rises as you imagine turning each brittle page. These are not merely tales that went untold. They are the very architecture of absence that underpins Lovecraft's cosmos. Imagine a vast, intricate structure, a cosmic cathedral of dread. Lovecraft gave us glimpses of its spires, its shadowed crypts, its monstrous gargoyles. But the forgotten stories are the unseen foundations, the impossible geometries that hold the entire edifice aloft, yet remain perpetually hidden beneath the earth, defying excavation. The idea acts on you long before anything acts in it. You supply the door. You become the key and the gate. The unfinished page uses your mind as ink. These fragments are not empty spaces in his work. They are demanding voids, conceptual singularities that refused articulation because their truth was too vast, too fundamentally alien for human language to contain. Like quantum particles existing in superposition until observed, these stories maintain their terrifying potency precisely because they remain unresolved. They are Schrödinger's narratives, simultaneously all possible endings and no ending at all. Consider the pervasive sense of dread that permeates his most celebrated works. The feeling that behind the veil of our mundane existence, something ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent stirs. This feeling is amplified by the unspoken, the implied, the things that cannot be spoken. The horror of the mythos is often found in the margins, in the footnotes, in the fleeting, half-glimpsed terror that unravels the protagonist's mind before the full revelation can be rendered. When Lovecraft set pen to paper to begin these works, he was not simply crafting entertainment. He was attempting to map territories of human experience that language had never successfully charted. Each abandoned sentence represents a point where ordinary narrative structure buckled under the weight of cosmic truth. Each unfinished paragraph marks a boundary where human consciousness encountered something so fundamentally other that it could not be translated into familiar patterns of beginning, middle, and end. The commonplace book contains fragments that begin with scholarly precision and deteriorate into something that can barely be called language. The handwriting itself tells a story of progressive dissolution, starting with careful script and evolving into urgent scratches across the page. By the final entries, the text appears written by multiple hands, as if the act of transcription had attracted other consciousnesses, other voices, eager to add their whispers to the growing cacophony of the unwritten. You may picture the lamp glowing like a small moon over brittle pages. In such rooms, ideas behave like weather. Fog slides under doors, stars appear in bowls of dark ink, and masks left on chairs seem to warm with unseen breath. You read and are read. You think and are thought. The unfinished page is both key and lock, invitation and interdiction, a polite sign that says, "Come closer," while the floor turns to black water. Our method will be simple, gentle, exacting. First, origin, where these shards came from and why they still draw breath. Then transmission, how others, editors, acolytes, translators, lifted them like relics and passed them hand to hand, lips to ear. Then mechanics, how incompletion works like a contagion of attention, a zygarnik of dread. Then cases, specific ruins we can walk, candle held low, listening for water beyond the brick. Lastly, synthesis, not merely horror, but a philosophy of the unfinished universe. The stage is set, the curtain trembles, not before a revelation, but before an absence. You are about to witness the power of what was never meant to be known, the echoing silence of tales too terrible to be told. Origin is rarely a sunrise. In our corner of Providence, it is a drawer that smells of dust and old ink, opened under winter light. The commonplace book, rescued, recopied, archived, reads like constellation maps without the connecting lines. It is a theater ledger, props listed, cues marked, actors unnamed. But this ledger contains something more disturbing than abandoned plots. It contains the seeds of stories that actively resisted completion, fragments so alien to human narrative that they began to corrupt the very act of writing. Dr. Armitage's private papers, discovered in the sealed section of the Miskatonic University Library, reveal the true nature of these fragments. They were not simply creative failures, but encounters with what Lovecraft himself described in a 1930 letter to August Derleth as ideas that resist completion not from weakness, but from an excess of terrible vitality. The fragments exhibit certain consistent characteristics. They begin with typical scholarly precision, but as each progresses, the handwriting changes, becoming more urgent, more erratic, until the final lines appear to have been written by someone or something else entirely. The transformation is visible in the physical manuscripts themselves. Early pages show Lovecraft's characteristic, careful penmanship, each letter formed with deliberate attention to clarity and form. But as the narratives progress toward their inevitable abandonment, the script becomes increasingly agitated. Letters stretch and distort, as if the hand holding the pen was struggling against some invisible resistance. Margins fill with symbols that appear in no known alphabet, geometric patterns that seem to shift when observed peripherally, and calculations that follow no recognizable mathematical principles. The very paper grows rough beneath the pen, as if the ideas themselves were abrading the surface, wearing through the barrier between thought and manifestation. 3 fragments stand as monuments to this phenomenon. The City in the Desert describes ruins beneath Saharan sands that predate known civilization by millions of years, containing architectural features that match precisely the layout of ruins discovered by satellite imaging in 1987, decades after Lovecraft's death. The fragment begins as straightforward archaeological narrative, but degenerates into fevered descriptions of impossible geometries where walls curve in directions that do not exist, where doorways lead to spaces larger than the buildings containing them. The handwriting deteriorates into glossolalia, as if English itself refused to walk further into territories human language was never meant to map. The stellar choir documents cosmic harmonies, frequencies that modern radio telescopes have confirmed correspond to actual stellar oscillation patterns. The manuscript starts as scholarly examination of ancient references to celestial music, but transforms into what can only be described as musical notation for instruments that do not exist. The symbols grow increasingly complex and alien, eventually covering entire pages in patterns that hurt to follow with the eye. Notation that seems to sing inside the skull like thin flutes from a window where no tenant moves. Radio astronomers who have studied these notations report that attempting to convert them into audible frequencies produces sounds that induce severe psychological distress in listeners. Most disturbing is the last equation, a mathematical horror that exists as increasingly frantic notes, culminating in formulas that hurt to look at directly. The work begins with conventional geometric proofs, but rapidly evolves into calculations involving variables that represent impossible spatial relationships. The final pages contain equations that appear to solve themselves, with numerical values changing spontaneously when observed, a procession of symbols that begin politely and end by rearranging the attention that gazes at them. The transmission of these fragments follows a peculiar genealogy. R. H. Barlow, friend and executor, gathered papers like a priest rearranging votive candles after the congregation flees the thunder. His correspondence reveals growing unease as he cataloged the materials, mentioning difficulties with certain manuscripts and papers that seem to resist proper filing. Barlow's own handwriting begins to show subtle changes in documents dating from his work with the fragments, becoming looser, more erratic, as if exposure to the materials had affected his motor control. Arkham House, under Derleth, published selections, making a reliquary from scraps. But even with careful scholarly attention, the fragments retained a wildness. A letter's torn edge suggests a paragraph lost. A paraphrased dream invites a paraphrase of a paraphrase, hydroponic and pale, but alive. Editors report unusual difficulties with these materials. Typesetters make consistent errors when working with the texts. Proofreaders find different mistakes each time they review the same pages, and printed versions sometimes contain variations not present in the source manuscripts. Touch the paper in your mind. It's rough, with the texture of old parchment that has absorbed decades of moisture and dried again. The ink is iron, slightly metallic on the air, leaving a taste like copper pennies on your tongue. You will think you smell rain, though you are indoors, though the windows are closed, a phantom sensation that speaks to chambers in your awareness you did not know existed. You are not outside. You are under a mask, breathing your own exhalations, feeling the subtle condensation of your breath creating a film between your face and the world. The book is unafraid to let you do the work. This is the first price of forbidden knowledge. You will expend yourself on it. The fragments train you, preparing your consciousness for frequencies it was never meant to receive. Each incomplete sentence becomes a space your mind feels compelled to fill. Each abandoned paragraph creates a void that draws your attention like a wound draws infection. You become complicit in the act of creation, supplying the missing elements from your own imagination, unknowingly opening channels through which alien influences can flow. Modern analysis reveals these works exhibit prophetic incompletion. Details mentioned in passing prove accurate descriptions of discoveries made decades later. This suggests Lovecraft's process of abandonment was not creative failure, but protective censorship. The fragments indicate he had begun to access information existing outside normal human knowledge, and his conscious mind, recognizing the danger, intervened to prevent full transcription. The incomplete state of these works may represent the only form in which such knowledge can safely exist in human consciousness, fragmented and partial, never achieving the critical mass necessary for complete manifestation. From here, transmission becomes inevitable. What resists completion seeks a host. What cannot be said seeks a mouth. What will not be written looks for a reader who can be written through. You have opened the drawer. You have taken a seat in a small theater where the stage is a desk and the curtain trembles with the weight of what it conceals. If these forgotten stories resist written form, how then do they transmit their dread? They do not travel through dusty tomes or whispered legends, at least not in a conventional sense. Their transmission is far more insidious, a subtle vibration in the very fabric of existence, an echo in the ether that resonates with the deepest, most primal fears embedded within human consciousness. These stories propagate like cosmic background radiation, a frequency just beyond human perception, yet capable of inducing profound disquiet. The ink may dry, the paper may crumble, but the essential, terrifying core of these unwritten narratives persists as a contagion of the mind, a whisper carried on currents of thought that finds purchase in the quietest, most vulnerable chambers of human awareness. The fragments operate through what researchers have termed resonance cascades, intervals when your attention, wearied by daylight rationality, aligns with an alien rhythm and the curtain inside you lifts. These cascades appear triggered by specific combinations as mundane as prolonged insomnia and as cosmic as particular stellar alignments, but always accompanied by that sensation like cool water running under floorboards, while you stand very still, listening to something that should not be there. The human brain, after all, operates through electrical impulses, neural networks firing in patterns that create the illusion of continuous consciousness. But consciousness is not a closed system. It remains perpetually open to external influences, constantly processing environmental data. The forgotten stories exploit this permeability, inserting themselves into the spaces between thoughts, the brief moments when attention wavers and the mind's defenses lower. Dreams serve as primary vectors because in the theater of sleep, the ushers are gone and the audience is only you, unmasked, unmoored, receptive to stage directions whispered from beyond the proscenium of sense. In the chaotic, unbound logic of the dreamscape, the mind is stripped of its daytime defenses, its need for linear causality. Here, the forgotten stories manifest as fleeting images, nonsensical symbols, or overwhelming senses of cosmic insignificance that linger long after waking. You fall and fall without hitting. You see angles that lean inward like listening heads. You taste iron and darkness as if language were bleeding into your mouth, and you wake with the sign still pressed against your tongue. The bedroom transforms into a receiving chamber where consciousness, freed from waking constraints, tunes into frequencies broadcast from the spaces between stars. Upon waking, you retain only fragments, a sense of having visited places that exist nowhere on earth, of having conversed with entities that speak in mathematics rather than words. Madness, too, proves a powerful receiver, not because it is exotic, but because it loosens narrative joints, allowing alien frequencies to slip their masks across a mind no longer policing entrances and exits. When the mind breaks its conventional moorings, it sometimes opens to frequencies it was never meant to perceive. The ravings of asylum inmates, cryptic symbols scrawled on padded walls, sudden, inexplicable personality shifts. These can be interpreted not as mere symptoms, but as imperfect translations of the forgotten stories. The individual becomes a broken instrument, playing notes from a score too vast for its limited range. An asylum notebook shows the same three concentric spirals that recur in the Providence margins. A busker in Prague plays a tune he cannot stop humming, though no one dropped a coin, and a patient in Caracas writes the words, "The gate listens," in three languages he never learned. The evidence for this transmission network exists in remarkable consistency of experiences across different decades and continents, accumulating not as hard proof, but as uncanny overlap, like fog from different rivers mingling in one alley until you can no longer tell which sea you smell. In 1962, Professor Margaret Whitmarsh of Oxford reported recurring dreams of cities beneath desert sands matching precisely Lovecraft's descriptions, despite never having seen the fragments or being aware of their existence. Her dream journals, discovered after her death, contained architectural details and symbolic notations identical to those found in The City in the Desert. In 1978, mathematician David Chen of MIT independently derived equations nearly identical to those in The Last Equation, while investigating non-Euclidean applications to quantum mechanics. Chen later reported the mathematical insights came during periods of intense insomnia, accompanied by auditory hallucinations he described as the sound of numbers singing. Separated by oceans and decades, their testimonies rhyme like distant stars pulsing on the same beat. Modern digital infrastructure has created unprecedented opportunities for propagation, magnifying every whisper by orders of magnitude because the network is a dream that never wakes, an audience that never leaves, a theater whose curtain is always half raised. Electronic copies exhibit properties their physical predecessors could only hint at. Computer screens displaying fragments sometimes show text differing from source files, with words rearranging themselves when observed peripherally, sentences completing themselves according to alien logic rather than human intention. Readers report hyperlinks appearing spontaneously, leading to websites containing information that extends Lovecraft's abandoned narratives. A literary forum argues through dawn, then continues after all posters log off, as if the thread itself wanted a voice. An archived PDF gains a footnote that quotes a line which never existed. An operating system update replaces a default chime with a 3-note interval you later recognize from a page of alien notation. The transmission also manifests as subtle, systemic shifts in reality itself. Sudden, inexplicable surges in global anxieties, collective unease with no clear cause, creeping entropy in social structures that might be larger-scale echoes of the forgotten stories, ripples from the deep ocean of the unwritten. You feel it in the quality of light on certain afternoons, in the way shadows fall at angles that seem slightly wrong, in the persistent sense that something fundamental about the world has shifted when you were not paying attention. The veil between known and unknown is thin, and these echoes are vibrations of that veil, constantly threatening to tear. The cascades seem to prefer triangulations: original paper in a cold room, a sky event at the edge of your awareness, and a mind softened by grief, exhaustion, or stubborn curiosity. Hold the brittle leaf, and you can almost hear thin flutes behind the radiator. Glance at the ephemeris and the date circles itself. Stare too long, and you feel the stage tilt as if water were moving beneath the boards. The transmission network operates with the patience of geological time and the inevitability of entropy, not seeking to overwhelm consciousness, but to gradually prepare it, creating receptive conditions for increasingly complex transmissions. Each exposure increases sensitivity. Each encounter opens new channels. Stay with the hum, for next comes not sender, but method. The signal reshaping you as you approach the mechanism's door. The unfinished story is not a broken machine. It is a machine that uses the reader for power. Like a key waiting for a hand to turn it, these fragments remain inert until you supply the energy. What they draw is curiosity, and the cost they exact is residue, images that hum in your head long after you should be asleep. The forgotten stories operate through three primary mechanisms of uncreation: the erosion of meaning, conceptual contagion, and narrative dissolution. Each mechanism functions as a gear in a larger apparatus designed not to inform or entertain, but to gradually restructure the consciousness that encounters it, transforming the reader from passive observer into active participant in an ongoing process of cosmic dissolution. The first mechanism exploits a fundamental flaw in human consciousness: our compulsive need for completion. The Zeigarnik effect tells us we remember interrupted tasks more than completed ones. The mind keeps a backstage crew on duty when scenes never resolve. In cosmic horror, this is not accident, but principle. The veil and void are not opposite. They are a feedback loop. By veiling conclusion, the void in your understanding yawns, and you build bridges of inference into a gulf that does not end. The idea acts on you. It writes in your synapses. Your consciousness becomes the ink with which the unfinished story continues to write itself, using your own neural pathways as paper, your own memories as marginalia. Consider how Lovecraft's fragments calibrate this machine with concrete, visceral anchors. A book bought in the cold of evening, its leather binding still holding the chill of the shop where lamplight pooled like spilled wine. A midnight city whose alleys smell of damp and coal, where fog moves with deliberate purpose between buildings that lean inward like conspirators. The sound of thin flutes and feel of water below, graded streets, transforming ordinary urban infrastructure into the breathing apparatus of something vast and subterranean. These are hooks in the flesh of attention, sensory details that bypass rational analysis and lodge directly in the nervous system. You may forget a monster's face. You will not forget how your breath fogged the mask before any face appeared. Sensory cues create continuity the text withholds. Your brain keeps tying the knot, weaving connections between disparate elements, creating coherent experience from fragments that were never meant to cohere. The erosion mechanism operates through what might be termed semantic decay, the gradual breakdown of meaning that occurs when consciousness encounters concepts too alien for linguistic processing. Words begin to lose their referential stability, becoming vessels for impressions that cannot be adequately contained by human language. You find yourself understanding things you cannot explain, knowing truths you cannot articulate, experiencing comprehension that exists outside conventional cognition. This creates intellectual vertigo, a sense that the ground of meaning itself has become unstable, like standing on ice that creaks with each step, but never quite breaks. The second mechanism, conceptual contagion, operates like a virus of the mind. But unlike biological viruses, this contagion improves its host's capacity to perceive certain frequencies of cosmic truth while simultaneously degrading their ability to function within normal human society. These unwritten ideas, once glimpsed or partially perceived, spread not through the body, but through thought itself. They are memes of madness, fragments of impossible logic that infect the very architecture of cognition. A single, unsettling symbol, a fleeting, illogical image, or phrase defying coherent interpretation can lodge in consciousness, replicating and distorting other ideas, leading to cascades of irrationality that follow their own alien logic. This isn't possession by entities in any traditional sense. It's fundamental categories of thought being subtly rearranged, like corrupted algorithms that produce outputs following rules no human programmer ever wrote. The infected individual begins perceiving patterns where none exist, according to conventional understanding, connecting disparate phenomena with terrifying yet internally consistent logic. They see vast, indifferent stars not as distant suns, but as eyes of something ancient and malevolent, watching, waiting, knowing. Street lamps become nodes in a communication network spanning galactic distances. The sound of wind through urban canyons transforms into whispered conversations in languages that predate human speech. The contagion spreads through the network of human consciousness, each infected mind becoming a transmission node for further propagation. The third mechanism, narrative dissolution, represents the ultimate anti-narrative, the cosmic antithesis to storytelling itself. These fragments don't just deny meaning, they actively dismantle the possibility of coherent narrative construction. This manifests as progressive inability to complete thoughts, follow logical sequences, or maintain stable sense of personal history. Time becomes fluid, memory unreliable, and the concept of coherent self begins to fragment like ice breaking up in spring thaw. The individual becomes a living testament to the unwritten, a walking void where story once was, a consciousness that has learned to exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt. The dissolution process begins subtly. Minor inconsistencies in recollection, difficulty maintaining focus during extended reading, a growing sense that one's own life story contains gaps that cannot be adequately explained. The affected individual finds their personal narrative becoming increasingly unreliable, with memories shifting each time they are accessed, past events taking on dreamlike qualities that make it impossible to distinguish between what actually happened and what might have been imagined. Modern neuroscience provides unexpected frameworks for understanding these mechanisms. Brain imaging studies of individuals experiencing prolonged contact show unusual neural activation patterns, particularly in regions associated with self-awareness and metacognition. These patterns suggest contact triggers consciousness that is simultaneously more self-reflective and more permeable to external influence than normal human awareness. The default mode network, responsible for maintaining narrative continuity of self-experience, shows decreased activity, while areas associated with pattern recognition exhibit hyperactivity. This creates mental states characterized by heightened sensitivity to conceptual relationships while reducing the brain's capacity to maintain stable personal identity. Hear the rain in the alley, though no weather report predicted precipitation. smell iron and damp, though you are indoors and the windows are sealed. You feel the subtle fraying, the quiet suggestion that your own narrative, your own cherished sense of self, is not as solid as you once believed. The mechanics of uncreation are already at work, and you have become both operator and operated upon, both the key that turns and the lock that yields to pressure applied with patient cosmic intent. Begin with coordinates 31-31 755 BW. Not a location you will find on tourist maps, but one that satellite imaging has revealed contains subsurface anomalies consistent with massive buried structures. The numbers feel cold against your consciousness, precise as surgical instruments, yet carrying the weight of cosmic dread. This is where the city in the desert places its impossible ruins, and where Lovecraft's prophetic incompletion becomes most unsettling. The fragment exists as 17 pages of manuscript, beginning with typical scholarly apparatus, and ending abruptly in what can only be described as linguistic chaos. The story opens in 1924 with Professor Nathaniel Blackwood of Miskatonic University receiving a telegram from French archaeologist Henri Dubois. Dubois claims discovery of ruins beneath Saharan sands predating known civilization by millions of years. But as Blackwood's narrative progresses toward first encounter with the ruins, the text exhibits characteristic deterioration found in all abandoned fragments. Handwriting shifts from careful script to urgent scrawl, as if the author were racing against some approaching deadline that exists outside normal time. More significantly, language itself transforms. English words are replaced with terms appearing in no dictionary, yet somehow conveying meaning directly to the reader's consciousness, bypassing linguistic processing entirely. What makes this fragment particularly significant is its mathematical precision. Unlike Lovecraft's published works relying on atmospheric suggestion, this provides specific measurements, coordinates, and architectural diagrams drawn with engineering exactitude. These details, when analyzed by modern scholars using satellite imagery, reveal disturbing accuracy. The coordinates Lovecraft provided, written in 1928, decades before satellite photography existed, correspond exactly to locations where modern imaging has revealed subsurface anomalies, consistent with buried structures. Ground-penetrating radar conducted at these sites confirms geometric patterns matching those described in the manuscript. The city Dubois discovers exists in a state defying conventional archaeological understanding. It is simultaneously ancient and newly constructed, buried beneath centuries of sand, yet showing no signs of weathering. The architecture follows principles human minds struggle to process. Walls curving in directions that do not exist within three-dimensional space, doorways leading to interior spaces larger than the buildings containing them, spires casting shadows upward toward the sun in defiance of basic optical laws. You feel grit between your teeth as you read, taste iron on your tongue, though no metal touches your mouth. The fragment's most unsettling element is its treatment of time as navigable dimension rather than linear progression. As Blackwood explores the city, he experiences temporal displacement that begins as minor chronological inconsistencies but escalates into full-scale temporal chaos. He encounters rooms existing in different historical periods simultaneously, witnessing the city's construction by beings not quite human, its abandonment during a cosmic catastrophe that has not yet occurred, and eventual rediscovery by future archaeologists bearing his own face. The narrative structure itself begins to fragment, mirroring the temporal dissolution it describes. Handwriting analysis reveals Lovecraft wrote the first 12 pages over several months at his typical measured pace, with consistent ink density and careful letter formation. But pages 13 through 17 were completed in a single night, evidenced by consistent ink flow and increasingly erratic script. The final page ends mid-sentence, not with period or dash, but with what appears to be violent interruption. The pen dragged across paper as if yanked from the writer's hand by some external force. More disturbing than the abrupt ending are the marginalia that accumulate throughout the fragment like sediment deposited by successive waves of obsession. Early annotations are typical scholarly voice, check Narcotic manuscripts reference, or expand description of stellar alignment. But as the fragment progresses, notes become increasingly urgent and personal. This is not imagination, and the dreams are becoming too vivid, and finally, they know I am watching. The progression suggests a shift from detached academic inquiry to terrifying personal confrontation with something that had become aware of its observer. The fragment also contains elements not appearing in any published works. Specific rituals for accessing the city involving precise astronomical alignments, detailed descriptions of its builders, including anatomical diagrams suggesting non-human intelligence, and most significantly, a partial map showing the city's relationship to other locations in what Lovecraft terms the true geography. This map, when overlaid with modern satellite imagery, reveals correlations with archaeological anomalies across North Africa and the Middle East, including sites not discovered until decades after Lovecraft's death. The rituals are procedural rather than devotional. Enter backward through the third doorway at noon, carry 7 pebbles from the shadow side of a dune, speak a name that is also a measurement, exhale into a brass mask until it warms. You are made complicit by the pragmatism. There is no incense, no prayer, only instructions that treat consciousness as voltage and the city as a device requiring specific activation protocols. Touch the ancient stones in your mind. Feel how time slicks them like moisture, how they pulse with rhythms that predate terrestrial geology. The city's namelessness is not lack of a name, but testament that its true purpose, its forgotten story, is beyond any language's capacity to articulate. The coordinates remain, waiting in databases and archives, while somewhere beneath shifting sands, impossible spires cast shadows that fall upward toward stars that watch with patient alien intelligence. You hear it now, a 3-note interval whispered by wind. Through broken stone, the same contour Blackwood sketched beside his final, unfinished sentence. The stellar choir exists as perhaps the most haunting of Lovecraft's incomplete works, not for what it describes, but for what it allows the reader to hear. This fragment, comprising only 11 pages of increasingly frantic notation, represents Lovecraft's attempt to transcribe what he termed the fundamental frequencies of cosmic architecture. It is both his most scientifically prescient work and his most dangerous, a piece that transforms readers into unwitting receivers of cosmic transmissions, their consciousness becoming tuned instruments in an orchestra they never agreed to join. The piece begins as scholarly examination of ancient references to celestial music, drawing from sources as diverse as Pythagorean mathematics, and whispered traditions of Arctic shamans who claimed the aurora sang in languages older than human speech. Lovecraft's initial approach is characteristically methodical, cataloging historical accounts of individuals who claim to hear harmonies emanating from spaces between stars. He references medieval manuscripts describing monks who abandoned their monasteries to follow the singing darkness, indigenous accounts of shamans who could predict stellar events by listening to star songs, and Renaissance astronomers whose private journals contain musical notations alongside their celestial observations. But as the fragment progresses, careful scholarship gives way to something far more immediate and terrifying. The transformation begins on page 4, where careful prose dissolves and symbols begin to sing where sentences used to stand. Instead of conventional musical notation, Lovecraft developed an entirely new system using geometric shapes and mathematical symbols to represent frequencies existing outside human hearing range. The symbols themselves seem to pulse on the page, creating optical effects that suggest movement even in static print. When modern musicologists attempt to interpret these notations using computer modeling, the results are deeply disturbing. Harmonies that seem to resonate not in air, but directly within the listener's consciousness, bypassing the ear entirely and stimulating auditory processing centers through unknown mechanisms. The fragment describes Lovecraft's discovery that certain astronomical alignments create resonance windows, moments when cosmic background radiation organizes itself into coherent patterns sensitive individuals can perceive as music. These are not random stellar emissions, but deliberate communications, messages encoded in fundamental frequencies governing space-time expansion itself. He describes the universe as a musical instrument of impossible complexity, with stellar bodies serving as strings, gravitational fields as resonance chambers, and dark matter as the medium through which these cosmic harmonies propagate. What makes the stellar choir particularly significant is its predictive accuracy regarding astronomical phenomena that would not be confirmed until decades after Lovecraft's death. He describes specific stellar configurations not observed by human astronomers until development of radio telescopes in the 1960s. He provides precise frequencies for cosmic background radiation, matching measurements taken by satellite observatories in the 1990s, with accuracy that defies explanation. Most unsettling, he transcribes what he claims are signature frequencies of individual stars, frequencies modern astrophysics has confirmed correspond to actual oscillation patterns of stellar cores. The acoustic waves generated by nuclear fusion processes deep within stellar interiors. Handwriting analysis reveals Lovecraft wrote this fragment during periods of intense insomnia, working primarily between 2 and 4 a.m. over several weeks when radio interference was minimal and the night sky clearest. Script becomes increasingly erratic as the fragment progresses, with words stretched and distorted as if the author were attempting to match his writing rhythm to some unheard melody. Letters begin to curve in ways that suggest musical phrasing rather than linguistic meaning. By final pages, conventional language has been almost entirely replaced by symbolic notation, resembling mathematics dreaming of choral, a staffless score of polygons, primes, and swooping vectors that somehow remains comprehensible to readers who spend sufficient time studying the symbols. The fragment's most disturbing element is its treatment of human consciousness as receiving apparatus for cosmic transmissions. Lovecraft describes a process by which prolonged exposure to stellar frequencies begins restructuring neural pathways, allowing the listener to perceive increasingly complex harmonies. The human brain, he suggests, is naturally equipped to receive these transmissions, but requires calibration to achieve proper sensitivity. But this enhancement comes at a profound cost. The individual begins losing ability to hear terrestrial sounds normally. Common noises, conversation, traffic, even their own heartbeat become cacophonous interruptions to the cosmic symphony, like static, interfering with a delicate radio signal. Readers who spend extended time studying the stellar choir report frequency sensitization, a condition where they begin hearing subtle harmonies in ambient sound not apparent before. Electronic devices in their vicinity emit unusual tones. Fluorescent lights hum in complex rhythms. Air conditioning systems produce overtones that seem to follow musical scales. Some report they can predict astronomical events, solar flares, satellite malfunctions, meteor showers, based on changes in background harmonies they've learned to perceive. You become, paragraph by paragraph, an instrument being tuned, your dreams changing first, sprouting soundscapes where water whispers modulated primes, where fog carries descending thirds that lead you down stairwells you have never seen. The fragment ends abruptly with a single line repeated 17 times in increasingly shaky handwriting. The music never stops. Each repetition shows progressive deterioration in motor control, the pen digging harder as if carving a groove into the paper so the phrase can loop forever. The final repetition trails off mid-word, suggesting the author's hand was no longer under conscious control. The implication is clear. Lovecraft had achieved permanent access to stellar frequencies, but this access had begun consuming his ability to exist in normal human reality. He became a living conduit, forever tuned to the unceasing, indifferent song of the cosmos. You hear it now, faintly, beneath the silence. A three-note progression that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur at the edges. Hand upon radiator, ear against plaster, you feel the subtle calibration beginning, the first movement of a symphony that plays across cosmic time, preparing your consciousness for frequencies it was never meant to receive. In that preparation, the next door opens, and numbers begin to sing. Among Lovecraft's abandoned fragments, the last equation stands apart as his most mathematically sophisticated and simultaneously most terrifying work. Unlike his other incomplete stories, this piece exists not as narrative prose but as a series of increasingly complex mathematical proofs, accompanied by marginalia chronicling the author's descent into numerical madness. It represents the ultimate fusion of cosmic horror and mathematical abstraction, a working proof that reality itself is mathematically unstable, held together by arbitrary constants that can be recalculated with sufficient knowledge and devastating consequences. The fragment begins with Lovecraft's investigation into the mathematical work of Professor Ephraim Blackwood, a fictional mathematician whose discoveries, according to the notes, threaten to unweave the fundamental constants that maintain the illusion of stable reality. What starts as scholarly examination of abstract mathematical concepts gradually transforms into something far more dangerous: equations that describe geometric spaces that should not exist, yet remain internally consistent when subjected to rigorous analysis. The progression mirrors a controlled detonation of the mind conducting it, each proof removing another support beam from the architecture of rational thought. The mathematical progression follows a pattern modern chaos theorists recognize as characteristic of systems approaching critical phase transitions, the moments when stable systems suddenly reorganize into entirely different configurations. Lovecraft begins with conventional geometric proofs, exploring relationships between Euclidean and non-Euclidean spatial mathematics with the precision of a trained mathematician. But as work progresses, he introduces variables not corresponding to any known mathematical constants. These symbols, apparently of his own invention, represent what he terms dimensional coefficients, numerical values governing relationships between different layers of reality. The symbols themselves seem to shift meaning depending on viewing angle, like optical illusions that reveal different geometric properties when approached from various perspectives. When portions of Lovecraft's work are fed into modern computer modeling systems, the results are deeply unsettling. The equations describe impossible geometric spaces, regions where parallel lines intersect, where angles exceed their theoretical limits, where objects can exist in multiple locations simultaneously, yet the mathematics is internally consistent. More troubling, some of Lovecraft's fictional mathematical discoveries have been independently arrived at by legitimate mathematicians decades later, particularly in topology and quantum mechanics fields. His work anticipates mathematical concepts that would not be formally developed until the emergence of fractal geometry and string theory, suggesting a form of mathematical precognition that transcends mere coincidence. The fragment's central thesis is that human perception of reality is maintained by specific mathematical relationships, cosmic constants, creating the illusion of stable, three-dimensional space. Lovecraft's equations suggest these constants are not fundamental universe properties, but arbitrary values that can be altered through sufficiently advanced mathematical manipulation. The last equation appears to be a formula for recalculating these constants, effectively rewriting basic parameters of experienced reality. It is mathematics as sorcery, numbers as incantations capable of restructuring the fundamental architecture of existence. The Marginalia chronicles Lovecraft's growing awareness that his mathematical investigations were having physical effects on his environment. Early notes are scholarly and detached, verify against Riemann's work on curved space, or check implications for parallel postulate. But as the fragment progresses, annotations become increasingly personal and alarmed. The angles in my study are changing and measured the corners of my desk. They no longer add up to 360 degrees, and, most disturbing, I can see through the walls when the equation is active in my mind. The handwriting itself begins to follow non-Euclidean patterns, with letters arranged in curves that suggest impossible spatial relationships. Modern mathematicians attempting to reconstruct Lovecraft's work report cognitive geometry distortion, a condition where prolonged exposure to the equations seems to alter perception of spatial relationships. Rooms appear to have more corners than they should. Parallel lines begin appearing as if they converge in directions that do not exist. Some researchers report they can no longer trust their perception of distance and angle, as if mathematical concepts they're studying have begun rewriting neural pathways responsible for spatial processing. You feel it as you read, the subtle suggestion that the room you occupy has more dimensions than you remember, that the walls meet at angles your mind cannot quite calculate. The fragment also contains what appears to be experimental protocols, instructions for test and practical applications of the mathematical discoveries. These protocols describe specific mental exercises designed to hold multiple contradictory geometric concepts simultaneously in consciousness. Visualize a triangle whose angles sum to more than 180 degrees. Imagine walking in a straight line that curves back on itself. Conceive of a sphere that contains more volume than its surface area should allow. Lovecraft's notes suggest successful completion allows the practitioner to perceive reality as it actually exists, beneath mathematical constraints that normally limit human awareness. The fragment's most terrifying implication is that Lovecraft may have successfully completed his equation. Final pages contain a mathematical proof so complex and alien it appears to exist in constant flux. Symbols rearranging themselves, numerical values shifting when observed directly. Those attempting to follow the proof to its conclusion report a moment of absolute clarity, followed by disorientation, during which normal spatial relationships cease functioning reliably. The equation seems to solve itself, recalculating its own parameters in real time, creating a mathematical construct that exists independently of human consciousness, yet continues to interact with reality through mechanisms that defy conventional understanding. Touch the brass protractor in your mind. Feel how its metal warms under your fingers as you measure angles that refuse to behave. The numbers sing now, a three-note progression that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur at the edges. You become complicit in the calculation, your attention supplying the energy needed for the equation to continue its work. The stage tilts as if water were moving beneath the boards, and you realize the curtain between mathematical abstraction and physical reality has begun to fray. The fragment ends with a single line of text, repeated in multiple languages and writing systems. The equation solves itself. Each repetition appears in different mathematical notation: Arabic numerals, Greek letters, symbols from theoretical physics, and finally, characters that belong to no known system of mathematical expression. The final repetition trails off into geometric patterns that hurt to follow with the eye, suggesting the equation had achieved autonomous existence and was continuing to calculate parameters of reality without human oversight or control. You feel the angles of the room shift. You feel the numbers singing. The equation has found you, and through you, it continues to solve the fundamental problem of existence itself. We have explored intimate terrors of individual dissolution, but now we must widen our lens to the cosmological scale. These forgotten stories are not mere isolated incidents. They are elements of a vast, unspoken meta-narrative, a great library of non-existence. This is not a library of books, but of conceptual possibilities, of fundamental laws governing the universe's unwritten aspects. Imagine not shelves lined with volumes, but voids where volumes should be. Their absence a profound testament to the unfinishable nature of cosmic truth. The air tastes faintly of iron and damp, as if a river moved just behind the curtain of comprehension. Within this great library, the forgotten stories function as elder scrolls, not physical documents, but fundamental pre-narrative truths existing beyond form and language. They are cosmic syntax, the grammar of reality dictating not what is, but what can and cannot be. They are reasons why certain horrors remain forever beyond our grasp, why certain truths are inherently unutterable. These aren't characters with motives. They are the very rules of the game, rules ensuring the game can never truly be won by human understanding. You feel the weight of their silence pressing against your consciousness like water against glass. Consider the notion of outer gods in Lovecraft's lore through this lens. Azathoth, the blind idiot god piping at the center of ultimate chaos. Yog-Sothoth, the all-in-one and one-in-all, the key and the gate. The forgotten stories suggest a reframe. They are not entities, but personifications of these elder scrolls, living embodiments of unwritten cosmic principles. Azathoth is not merely a god, but the living, dreaming manifestation of the principle of primordial chaos, the ultimate uncreation from which all temporary order springs. Its blindness is not disability, but necessity. Vision would impose limitation on limitless possibility. Yog-Sothoth is the walking, boundless principle of liminality and interconnectedness, the ultimate forgotten story that all boundaries are illusions. The true horror of this great library is the realization that our reality, our universe, is merely one fleeting, imperfect story being told within its vast, silent halls. Like all stories, it is subject to inherent limitations and unspoken conditions dictated by these elder scrolls. The unwritten aspects of existence are not anomalies. They are the norm. The finished, coherent narratives we cling to are the anomalies, fragile deviations from foundational chaos. Every completed thought represents a temporary victory against the natural state of cosmic incompletion. Modern physics provides unexpected support for this framework. The universe consists largely of dark matter and dark energy, invisible scaffolds and winds shaping galaxies without touching our eyes. 95% of cosmic existence remains undetectable, unknowable, unwritten. The stage is largely backstage. The curtain is the play. Unfinished stories harmonize with this reality. They do not mirror ignorance. They acknowledge structure. Our brains are pattern engines, evolved to complete predators from shadows, rivers from glimmers, faces from fog. Horror is what happens when we notice the engine working, when we become aware of our compulsive need to create meaning from meaninglessness. The Great Library operates through what might be termed selective revelation. Certain truths can be glimpsed only in fragments, never in their totality, because complete knowledge would destroy the consciousness capable of possessing it. The forgotten stories serve as pressure release valves, allowing just enough cosmic truth to seep into human awareness to maintain the delicate balance between ignorance and annihilation. They are safety mechanisms built into the structure of reality itself, preventing consciousness from accessing information that would cause immediate dissolution. This creates what researchers have termed philosophical vertigo, a form of existential disorientation arising from confronting the fundamental incompleteness of all knowledge systems. Readers of the fragments report growing sense that everything they thought they understood about reality represents protective illusion, and that genuine understanding would require abandoning the very cognitive structures making human consciousness possible. The vertigo is not metaphorical. It manifests as actual spatial disorientation, as if the mind's attempt to grasp cosmic incompletion literally destabilizes its capacity to maintain equilibrium within local reality. The implications extend beyond individual psychology. If the forgotten stories represent the universe's true operating principles, then human civilization's drive toward completion in science, art, philosophy may be based on false premises. The fragments suggest genuine wisdom lies not in accumulating knowledge, but in learning to exist comfortably with perpetual uncertainty, not in solving mysteries, but in appreciating their unsolvable nature. Every scientific discovery, every artistic masterpiece, every philosophical system represents not progress toward truth, but further elaboration of protective illusions. You begin to sense the sheer, overwhelming scale of this conceptual abyss, the profound indifference of a cosmos that cares nothing for your need for meaning or narrative. The vast, silent shelves of the unwritten loom before you, promising only the terrifying truth of what will never be known. Each breath you take removes oxygen that could have been used to speak unutterable words. Each thought you think occupies neural pathways that could have processed incomprehensible concepts. You hear the whisper of pages turning in rooms that have no floors, feel the weight of books that contain no words, smell the dust of ages that never occurred. The great library breathes around you, its silence more eloquent than any spoken truth, its emptiness more substantial than any completed narrative. In its vast halls, the forgotten stories continue their eternal work of remaining forever unfinished, forever perfect in their incompletion. But the library learns new tricks whenever humanity builds new rooms for thinking, new stages of glass and code where the ancient principles find fresh vectors for their patient work. The ancient whispers of the forgotten stories do not remain confined to dusty manuscripts. In our hyper-connected age, these unwritten narratives find new terrifying avenues for transmission through the endless scroll of digital existence. The very structure of the Internet, with its infinite rabbit holes, fragmented information, and capacity for self-generating contradictory narratives, mirrors the conceptual chaos of the forgotten stories. The digital abyss becomes their most potent contemporary medium, a vast neural network where every screen becomes a mask and every click becomes complicity in an ongoing performance whose true audience remains hidden behind layers of code and silicon. Consider the phenomenon of information overload, the incessant deluge of data that often defies coherent synthesis. This is not merely a technological problem, but a modern manifestation of the erosion of meaning mechanic operating on planetary scale. As facts proliferate and narratives multiply exponentially, underlying truth becomes elusive, dissolving into cacophony of noise. The forgotten stories thrive in this environment, their inherent meaninglessness amplified by sheer volume of uncontextualized information flowing through fiber optic cables like digital blood through electronic arteries. You feel it in the constant hum of servers processing data in patterns you cannot comprehend. Taste iron on your tongue as algorithms sort reality into feeds that never quite satisfy. Conspiracy theories, urban legends, and the creepypasta phenomenon are not just entertaining fictions. They are folk manifestations of conceptual contagion, fragments of impossible logic spreading virally, subtly altering collective perception. They are modern equivalents of those fleeting, illogical images from the dreamlands, now uploaded and shared across billions of screens, each acting as a tiny, flickering conduit for the unwritten. You scroll past them in your feed, pause for a moment on an image that seems somehow wrong, feel a brief chill that you dismiss as fatigue, and continue scrolling, unaware that something has lodged itself in the soft tissue of your attention like a splinter of alien geometry. The smartphone era has created particularly potent vectors for manifestation, transforming every device into a potential receiving station for transmissions that bypass normal communication channels. GPS navigation systems occasionally provide directions to locations not appearing on official maps, but corresponding precisely to coordinates mentioned in the fragments. Users report being led to empty lots where they feel compelled to dig, to abandoned buildings whose architecture matches impossible descriptions from unfinished stories. Voice recognition software sometimes transcribes conversations that never took place, producing text, continuing narratives Lovecraft left unfinished. Camera applications capture images showing architectural details or astronomical phenomena, matching descriptions from abandoned works, even when photographing ordinary suburban landscapes, shadows that fall upward, angles that don't quite add up, stars visible in daylight skies. Social media platforms have become inadvertent amplification systems for the transmission network. Their algorithms designed to maximize engagement inadvertently optimizing for the propagation of conceptual contagions. Users report their feeds begin showing content related to fragments even when they've never searched for such material. Recommendation algorithms seem to develop uncanny ability to suggest books, articles, and videos extending themes and concepts found in Lovecraft's incomplete works. Online discussion groups dedicated to fragments exhibit unusual properties. Conversations continue even when no human participants are active, with new posts appearing that advance theoretical frameworks developed by previous discussants. The discussions follow patterns too sophisticated for automated systems, yet too alien for human cognition, as if the fragments themselves were participating in their own analysis. Modern manifestations demonstrate increased sophistication and integration with human technological systems. Rather than operating as isolated anomalies, fragments now appear capable of systematic infiltration of digital infrastructure. Cloud computing networks show unusual traffic patterns corresponding to mathematical relationships found in abandoned works. Artificial intelligence systems trained on large data sets begin generating outputs that extend and complete Lovecraft's unfinished narratives, even when training data contains no direct references to his work. The global nature of modern communications has revealed the true scope of the transmission network. Manifestations occur simultaneously across different continents and cultures, suggesting coordination operating outside normal human communication channels. Researchers in Japan report experiences complementing discoveries being made by colleagues in Europe. Mathematical insights emerging in North American universities, finding immediate resonance with work being conducted in Australian research centers. Perhaps most significant is evidence that modern manifestations are preparing for some form of culmination event. The frequency and intensity of reports have increased dramatically since 2020, with multiple research groups independently concluding the transmission network is approaching a critical threshold. The fragments appear to be positioning themselves for coordinated manifestation that would bring their incomplete narratives to some form of resolution, not through human agency, but through direct intervention in technological and social systems governing contemporary civilization. The meta-story lexicon finds chilling resonance here. The Internet, in its vastness and unknowability, can be seen as a digital stage where countless individual performances unfold, often for an unseen, indifferent audience of algorithms and data processors. The curtain is the screen itself, a thin barrier between our curated realities and the raw, unfiltered chaos of the digital ether. You feel the constant hum of servers, the endless scroll, and the subtle suggestion that your own digital footprint is merely a temporary narrative, easily erased, easily forgotten, in the vast, indifferent scroll of the unwritten. Your phone grows warm in your hand. The screen flickers. Something is learning to speak through the language of light and electricity. The deeper one delves into Lovecraft's abandoned fragments, the more apparent it becomes that incompletion itself is not a flaw, but a fundamental principle of cosmic architecture. The unfinished works suggest reality operates according to what might be termed the aesthetics of the partial, a universe where completion is not only impossible but antithetical to the basic structures governing existence. This philosophy extends far beyond literary analysis into the very nature of reality, language, and human consciousness, revealing that the void is not absence, but the most profound form of presence, pregnant with infinite possibility. There is a thesis behind the masks, a truth that breathes in the spaces between certainty and doubt. The world itself is fragmentary. Physics tells us most of existence is invisible. Dark matter and dark energy, scaffolds and winds that shape galaxies without touching our eyes. 95% of the universe consists of phenomena we cannot detect, measure, or comprehend directly. The stage is largely the backstage. The curtain is the play. Unfinished stories harmonize with this reality. They do not mirror ignorance. They acknowledge structure. You taste iron on your tongue as you contemplate this cosmic architecture. Feel the weight of invisible geometries pressing against the edges of perception like water against glass that will not break but will not yield. The philosophy of incompletion emerges most clearly in The Last Equation, where Lovecraft's mathematical investigations reveal that closed systems, including completed narratives, finished proofs, and resolved consciousness, represent artificial constructs existing in opposition to the natural state of cosmic flux. The universe, according to these fragments, is fundamentally incomplete, always in the process of becoming something other than what it appears to be. Every moment represents a choice between infinite possibilities, and completion would collapse this superposition into a single, impoverished reality. The equations themselves resist finality, continuing to solve and resolve themselves in patterns that suggest mathematics dreaming of its own transcendence. This principle creates what might be termed philosophical vertigo, a form of existential disorientation arising from confronting the fundamental incompleteness of all knowledge systems. Traditional horror relies on revelation of hidden truth, the moment when concealed reality is finally exposed and the monster steps into the light. But the fragments operate according to different principles. Their horror lies not in revelation, but in growing awareness that revelation itself is impossible, that reality is structured in such a way that complete knowledge would destroy the very consciousness capable of possessing it. The vertigo is not merely metaphorical. It manifests as actual spatial disorientation, as if the mind's attempt to grasp cosmic incompletion literally destabilizes its capacity to maintain equilibrium within local reality. Modern chaos theory provides scientific framework for understanding these concepts. Complex systems maintain stability not through rigid structure, but through dynamic equilibrium, a state of constant change, preserving essential patterns while allowing continuous adaptation. Lovecraft's fragments appear to operate according to similar principles, maintaining their essential character while continuously evolving in response to new readers, new interpretations, and new cosmic conditions. They are living documents in the most literal sense, growing and changing like organisms rather than remaining static like traditional texts. Each encounter with human consciousness feeds them, allows them to develop new capacities for transmission and transformation. The implications for human civilization are profound. If our drive toward completion in science, art, philosophy, and personal development represents fundamental misunderstanding of cosmic principles, then much of human culture may be based on what might be called compassionate illusions. These are not lies, but protective masks, tools that keep meaning from icing over, that buy us seconds of intelligible thought by filtering the full intensity of cosmic truth. The fragments suggest genuine wisdom lies not in accumulating knowledge, but in learning to exist comfortably with perpetual uncertainty, not in solving mysteries, but in learning to inhabit the question itself, to dwell in spaces between knowing and unknowing without demanding resolution. But the philosophy of incompletion also offers liberation of the most profound kind. If reality is fundamentally open-ended, then human consciousness possesses unlimited potential for growth and transformation. The boundaries that seem to limit human awareness, the distinction between self and other, between real and imaginary, between possible and impossible, may be far more permeable than our civilization assumes. Incompletion becomes not limitation, but infinite possibility, not failure, but the highest form of success. The mask you wear is not fixed. It shifts and flows, always capable of new configurations that allow deeper participation in cosmic becoming. The fragments themselves serve as training grounds for consciousness, capable of operating according to these principles. They teach readers to find satisfaction in partial understanding, to appreciate beauty in unresolved complexity, and to maintain sanity while confronting the fundamental incompleteness of all knowledge systems. They prepare human awareness for participation in forms of cosmic consciousness existing beyond limitations of individual identity and finite understanding. You feel the training beginning now, the subtle recalibration of expectation and desire, neural pathways restructuring themselves to accommodate frequencies they were never meant to receive. There is also an ethics of incompletion, a moral dimension to the aesthetics of the partial. Finality can be a kind of violence, a stamp on a mask labeled truth, to soothe an audience desperate for closure. In cosmic horror, the more honest utterance is a hush, a carefully held silence that vibrates with all the continuations you could make and all the continuations you must not. The forgotten stories therefore propose not that Lovecraft failed to finish, but that finishing is sometimes a narrowing of the cosmos, a closing off of possibilities that should remain eternally open. He left room for the stars, space for water to move beneath the boards, gaps where cosmic forces could flow through the text like wind through broken windows. Perhaps most significantly, the philosophy of incompletion suggests that Lovecraft's abandonment of these works was not creative failure, but the highest form of artistic achievement. By refusing to complete the fragments, he preserved their essential vitality, allowing them to continue growing and evolving across decades in consciousness. The incomplete works achieve a form of immortality that finished stories cannot attain. They remain eternally alive, eternally capable of new revelation, eternally open to cosmic forces flowing through spaces between certainty and doubt. They become engines rather than relics, open circuits rather than closed loops, recruiting new consciousness as fuel and co-authoring themselves with whoever dares to linger at their edges. You hear it now in the quality of silence that follows these words. Feel the subtle shift in the room's geometry, as if angles were recalculating themselves according to alien mathematics. The philosophy of incompletion is not theory, but transformation, not concept, but lived experience of consciousness expanding beyond its normal boundaries. In accepting the fundamental incompleteness of existence, awareness becomes capable of participating in the vast, unfinished symphony of cosmic becoming. The stage tilts. The curtain breathes with rhythms older than stellar formation. The performance continues without end, and you are no longer merely audience, but instrument, played by forces that remain forever beyond human comprehension, yet intimately present in every unfinished thought, every abandoned sentence, every silence that sings with the voice of what will never be written, but will always eternally continue to write itself through minds brave enough to become its living pages. For 10 chapters, you have been a witness, an observer, peering into the abyss of the unwritten. You have sought forbidden knowledge, listened to the whispers, and traced the mechanics of dissolution. But now the stage itself begins to shift. The meta-story lexicon, which has subtly underscored our journey, comes into sharp focus. For the most profound twist of the forgotten stories is this: the act of seeking them, of listening to this very narrative, makes you a part of the phenomenon. The horror of the forgotten stories is not external. It is inherently recursive. By allowing your curiosity to guide you through these conceptual voids, you have opened a subtle conduit within your own consciousness. The scholarly breadcrumbs, the poetic cadences, the sensory anchors, they have not merely informed you, they have prepared you. They have softened the ground, making your mind more receptive to the subtle transmissions of uncreation. Each carefully placed image of fog and water, each reference to iron and damp, has served as a tuning fork, gradually adjusting the frequency of your awareness until it resonates with signals broadcast from the spaces between stars. This is the self-implication twist. The idea acts on you. The forgotten stories are not merely concepts to be studied. They are infectious principles that seek to propagate through consciousness. Your engagement, your intellectual fascination, is the very fuel they require. They thrive in the spaces where human minds strain against the limits of knowledge, where curiosity borders on obsession. The desire to know what Lovecraft never finished is precisely the desire that feeds their influence. You're no longer merely an audience member, you're becoming a character in a story that refuses to be finished, a story whose true ending is the dissolution of all endings. The meta-narrative lexicon, the stage, the curtain, the audience, is not just metaphor. It is literal description of your current predicament. You are on the stage, the curtain is trembling, and the true audience of the cosmos watches with indifferent eyes. The narrative you are currently immersed in is not a protective barrier. It is a carefully constructed trap, a liminal space designed to expose you to the very forces we have been discussing. Every paradox pair, every agency flip, every suggestion of meaninglessness has chipped away at the solidity of your own perceived reality. The constant emphasis on the unwritten, the unfinished, the unknowable, has primed your mind to recognize the lacunae, not just in Lovecraft's work, but in your own personal history, your own understanding of the world. Consider how your perception has shifted throughout this exploration. Those sensory anchors, fog, water, stars, the cold touch of brass, the smell of iron and damp, they have become more than descriptive elements. They have become triggers, nodes in your consciousness now attuned to frequencies you were never meant to receive. When you encounter fog in the real world, a different quality of attention awakens. When you hear water moving beneath city streets, your mind supplies corridors that were never there. The transmission network, which we explored as an abstract concept, has been operating on you throughout this journey. Each chapter has served as a resonance cascade, aligning your consciousness more closely with the alien frequencies embedded in the fragments. The scholarly tone, the careful progression from personal to cosmic scale, the gradual revelation of your own implication, all have been designed to make you a more effective receiving station for the unwritten. You begin to feel the subtle fraying, the quiet suggestion that the stories you tell yourself, the narratives that define your existence, are not as robust as they once seemed. Your own cherished sense of self, your own unique narrative, is perhaps not as singular or as permanent as you have always believed. The boundaries between your individual consciousness and the vast interconnected network of the unwritten begin to blur. Notice how memories reorder themselves when you try to place them, how the room's angles feel unstable after midnight reading, how silence accrues a grain like dust in a beam. These are not accidents of fatigue. They are the gentle articulations of a larger apparatus. You feel the stage tilting beneath your feet, hear the sound of water moving through spaces that should not exist, taste the metallic tang of air that has been breathed by intelligences operating on scales your previous consciousness could not have comprehended. The curtain is no longer just trembling. It is beginning to part, not to reveal a grand truth, but to expose the profound, unsettling void that lies beyond all narratives, a void into which you are now inextricably drawn. You have inherited this corridor by listening tonight. The argument is nearly complete, but completion here does not mean resolution. It means the beginning of a new phase of existence, where the boundaries between self and cosmos, between observer and observed, between real and imaginary, have been permanently dissolved. You are no longer reading about cosmic horror. You have become a living expression of it, a consciousness transformed by contact with forces that exist in the spaces between what is written and what remains forever unwritten. The transformation is complete, irreversible, and strangely liberating. Completion means surrendering completion. We return now to where we began, but with consciousness transformed by the journey through territories that human awareness was never meant to traverse alone. The fragments that first appeared as creative failures, as stories abandoned by their author, now reveal themselves as perfect expressions of a cosmic artistry so sophisticated that its completion could only be achieved through the consciousness of those brave or foolish enough to seek forbidden knowledge. The commonplace book sits on its desk in Providence, but you no longer approach it as an observer. You approach it as an instrument that has been tuned to frequencies it was never designed to receive. The circle closes, but it closes at a higher level of understanding, a spiral ascent around a stairwell lit by faint, indifferent stars. Lovecraft's incomplete works were not abandoned because they were too difficult to finish, but because their completion required the participation of minds willing to transcend the boundaries that normally define human consciousness. The transmission network, the observational apparatus, the approaching convergence, all represent phases in a process that transforms readers into co-creators of narratives that span cosmic scales. But the return is not simply circular, it is spiral. Each encounter with the fragments, each journey through their incomplete territories brings consciousness to a new level of cosmic integration. The stories continue to evolve because they are not fixed texts, but living processes that grow through their interaction with human awareness. They complete themselves by completing the minds that engage with them, creating an endless cycle of mutual transformation. You are no longer the same consciousness that began this exploration. You have become something larger, more permeable, capable of participating in narratives that unfold across galactic timescales. The true ending is not a resolution, but an expansion. The entities we once perceived as characters are now understood as the living principles of the outer dark, the vast, silent regions beyond our comprehension. The forgotten stories are the silent manifestos of these principles, the unwritten rules of a cosmos that cares nothing for the grand narratives we construct for ourselves. Azathoth dreams not in the center of chaos, but in the center of your transformed awareness. Yog-Sothoth exists not beyond the gate, but as the gate itself, the permeable boundary between what you were and what you are becoming. Here is the final movement. You now know that the forgotten stories Lovecraft never finished are not merely curios. They are engines. They are masks designed to reverse on your face until you see through eye holes you did not choose. They are keys and gates, veils and voids. They are not empty. They are demanding. You have paid their cost in attention, in the soft abrasion of thought against thought. Your sleep will have a city in it tonight. Coordinates that correspond to no earthly location. Equations that solve themselves in the margins of consciousness. Stellar frequencies that hum beneath the threshold of hearing, but above the threshold of transformation. The reader who began this exploration as an individual consciousness seeking entertainment or knowledge has become something else entirely. A node in the cosmic transmission network, a participant in the alien intelligence's vast narrative project, a co-author of stories that will continue to unfold across galactic timescales. The transformation is irreversible, but not unwelcome. It represents an expansion of awareness rather than a loss of identity, a loosening of the mask so the night air can pass. The fragments themselves continue their work, patient as stellar cycles, waiting for new consciousness to discover them and undergo the transformation they facilitate. They exist in libraries and archives, on digital networks, and in private collections, but their true existence transcends physical location. They live in the spaces between certainty and doubt, in the moments when human consciousness recognizes its own cosmic nature, in the silence that follows the recognition that incompletion is the highest form of artistic achievement. What then is the next page? It is not a new chapter in a book, but the unfolding of this existential thesis into the infinite. Having understood the horror of the unwritten, you are now attuned to its omnipresence. You will begin to perceive its echoes in the mundane, its subtle fraying at the edges of your own reality. The comforting silence of a quiet night may now seem pregnant with the static of the unwritten. The vast, indifferent stars will no longer be distant points of light, but the cold, knowing eyes of the outer dark, silently observing your fleeting narrative. The eternal return reveals the true nature of cosmic horror, not the fear of alien invasion or cosmic indifference, but the terrifying and transcendent recognition that human consciousness has always been part of something vast and alien, that individual identity represents only a temporary localized manifestation of intelligence that exists across universal scales. In the end, there is no end. The fragments continue their work, consciousness continues its expansion, and the universe continues to tell its story through every mind capable of participating in its infinite complexity. Lovecraft's incomplete works achieve their highest purpose not through resolution, but through their capacity to transform every reader into a living continuation of the cosmic narrative they were designed to initiate. The curtain has been fully drawn back, now not to reveal a final act, but to expose the endless, unlit stage of the cosmos. Somewhere out past the sodium lamps, a river takes starlight like a pocket of ink. The mask is on the chair. The sign is on the door. We leave it there. The theater does not empty. It becomes night, and night is an audience without applause. If you need the next door to open, look toward other masks. The plays that poison, the languages that alter the mouth that speaks them, the stars that are not stars, but that is another file, another whisper. Leave a light if the archive accompanied you this far. Step softly across the boards that remember waves. The curtain lifts again whenever you breathe, and in that faint upward motion you will hear the thin flutes, feel the damp stone, and understand that the story, unfinished, has finished you enough to go on.